Well, hello again. This is Mike on the No Fences Show, and this is Ernest. And on the last show, we talked a little bit about parenting and how parents, in an attempt to do well, in an attempt to give their children motivation, sometimes build fences around them.
Correct.
And there's a chapter in one of the books that I've written it's called Hammer and Nail. And it says, if the only tool in your personal toolbox is a hammer, everything you deal with will look like a nail.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take that and look at parents, if dad solves problems by screaming and hollering and hitting and kicking, I'm not necessarily mean people, but objects and
Right.
things and slamming doors and throwing stuff, the kids are going to learn that.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you think they will or not, they do.
Right.
And mom is either going to become defensive all the time, which teaches her daughters to be defensive,
Right.
to be afraid of men who raise their voice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small saying, but it means so much when you're a parent trying to teach children. And if you can imagine the environment you grow up in, like a sponge, and I read a story
Right,
about
with the
sponge.
We did a show.
We did a
I
show on
actually taped
sponge.
that show.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I was the director for that.
Oh, okay. We talk about the sponge, and like a sponge, whatever you put into it eventually comes out.
Right.
And children are like sponges when they watch their parents.
You know, not to cut you off, but you made me think of a story. When you started talking about the nail and the hammer, when I first went into treatment, they had these stories we had to read. And they were true stories of people who had been in recovery. And they had a 40-year-old man who drove Cadillacs, nothing but Cadillacs, but he had had 12 accidents in 10 years with semis. Okay? And
Shouldn't have laughed, but
no, yeah, right. But they couldn't figure out what's going on with him. So they actually hypnotized him. And he reverted back to a kid. His father used to beat up his mother. And when he tried to help his mother, his father would hit him. He'd crawl under the table, and his father would try to kick him. And he said he used to sit under the table and say, when I get big, nobody's going to push me around. When I get big, nobody. And for years, he repeated this to himself. If he would go down on the highway and the truck wouldn't move, he assumed the truck was like his dad. It was pushing him around. So he wouldn't move. He'd have an accident with it.
wow.
And that's why he drove Cadillac, because it was the biggest car he could find. But that was a true story. And it was so strange, and that's what you just said. Said something about a dad holler and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That stuff is embedded in them children, and it stays there.
And it's a shame and it's sad because all the parents that I've dealt with in the groups and stuff that I've run, that's not their intention.
Right, it's not.
It's not. And they have honest intentions most times.
Right.
That they really want their children to become motivated, and it's always, well, I want my child to be better than me.
Right.
And that's fine.
That's what most parents say.
Yeah, and that's great. But while they're doing that, and how they're having them learn to be motivated, sometimes it has a reverse effect.
Right.
I don't know what a parent is trying to teach his child by beating him or kicking him.
Me either.
Spanking,
You
fine.
teach
I got
them to
tons
be
of
violent.
those.
Right. You're teaching them to be violent.
You
That's what
teach them to be violent. If that's how you respond, if you have a hammer, everything is a nail.
Right.
And they become nails. You name it, doors, you name it. I'm angry at everything. There was a show I watched today on YouTube about a man trying to start a weed eater,
Okay.
and he couldn't get his weed eater going.
Okay.
And the people are watching him, trying to start, and children are watching him start this weed eater. And he pulled and pulled, ended up throwing it out in the field,
Okay.
went and got it, brought it back, and beat it to pieces on the concrete. I mean, he tore that thing up,
Right.
and then bent the whole thing in half.
Right. So it was no good.
So it was absolutely useless, all because he couldn't control himself.
Okay.
And if it's not starting, there's a reason for it.
Right. Spark plug, mixed gas mixture, something.
Any number of things.
Right,
Any
carburetor.
number of things. He could not be doing the choke right.
Right. Exactly.
Anything. But why do we have to think that that's the answer? And I'm sure that young fella that was doing that, throwing that weed eater around, smashing it up, learned that somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you deal with things you can't control.
You beat them.
you beat them. And we get that, I mean, you've had that when you were younger because there's things changing now.
Right,
We have a friend, a mutual friend, who is adopted children,
right,
and she is so afraid to touch those children
yep,
for fear of CPS coming down on them. So what is CPS teaching the kids?
yeah, that they don't have to listen.
They don't have to listen.
Exactly, that's what they're teaching.
I can do, because if you touch me, I'm gonna call CPS.
Right,
And they do.
yes, they do.
And it's a shame because their parents are caught in that point between a rock and a hard place. But we're getting back to the parents' influence over children, especially when they're young, is so huge that most parents don't even realize it.
Okay, well, I mentioned a story to you. I'm gonna tell it in a little different way, but the same story. It's this kid I know, and her mother's always hollering and screaming at her.
All right?
Okay, whose mother hollered and screamed at her. I watched the kid, 2 years old, take a little plastic bat and lay the babies down and whoop the babies with the bat, saying, "Be quiet, stop crying." Dolls can't cry, but she's got this from her mother that this is the proper way to discipline children. Even your dolls are your children. Yes, your baby doll. So it's being passed on generation to generation to generation. And, it's really hard, and it's really hard on my oldest daughter knows this person well. And she's in Africa now, but she's figuring to become a psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker.
Right.
And she's always talking about something I mentioned earlier about the discipline that Southern black Jews put on their kids for fear that they would get killed if they weren't acting right in certain situations.
Right.
And it's driving my other two daughters crazy because she's always telling them. And for a while she got me with it because we were in the store. And my grandkids were running crazy in the store. And I kept telling them, "Stop, put that down." She said, "They ain't hurt nothing. They could pick up a can and put it back down." She says, "The other children do it." So, as long as you're not letting them just go wild and break stuff and do stuff. And all they were doing was picking up cereal boxes and turning them over to look at the back, which they've been learned how to do from eating cereal at the table. They see the adults look at the back of the box.
Right.
So it's ways and things you can do with your children to make them understand in a good way that, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but I do know what I'm trying to say. The way you raise your children and how you treat them definitely affects how they act when they get older.
Well, they're a product of their environment. All children, all of us, you, me, and all the children, all adults out there,
Right?
are products of our environment growing up. And it doesn't matter how hard we try and change, there's always things that we do that we learned as a child. From making our beds to any sort of discipline and how we're disciplined.
Right.
And I hate to see, if that child is not brought to attention on hitting the dolls, already she's using a weapon
Right.
to punish or consequence her children.
Right.
And that's another thing we're going to talk about, consequences versus punishment,
Right.
which is a big thing on what we teach our children.
Right.
And how they build fences around themselves.
When I was growing up, I got spanked some. I have 3 whippings that I'll talk about on a different show that I earned. I was never beaten. I was disciplined, okay? I mean, I got whippings. You call it beating if you want it. But every one of them, I earned them. It wasn't like they just jumped on me.
Okay, we got a minute to go.
So it was more watch the walls, mow the yard.
Yeah.
Find something to make you think and use your energy up. We only got a half a minute left. You go, sir.
Well, just trying to make sure we stay on track with the fences that we're trying to not build
Right.
around our children, that they take with them as they mature into adults. And anything that we as parents teach them that may down the road hamper their growth into a mature, responsible, productive human being, whether it be male or female. We need to look at that more in the future.
We need to leave in about 10 seconds.
So with that, we're going to stop this show for today,
Right.
and we'll start another one.
We get some.